So it's a great pleasure to introduce Chris Norris, who's with Wicklander-Zulawski. He spends a lot of his time training people in the art of interrogation. And he's going to many places as he's done this all around the world, and in addition to our own profession, the audit firms. So he's very much connected to what we do. I don't think I'll take any of your time. I'll leave it to you. I think you're going to find this an entertaining and educational setting, and maybe we'll learn some things that we can do to get the truth out of our students.
Thank you, Peter. Now for the fun stuff, right?
Good or bad? Were you to pass a lie detector test, wouldn't that help prove that you're telling the truth and help restore?
Would it?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Tom, do all NFL quarterbacks doctor the balls? And do you feel you've done anything differently than anybody else in the league?
I'm not sure. I can only speak for myself.
Did you ever witness or hear about or even suspect this was going on?
You hear a lot of things. I mean, I came in the game in 1993, and you heard whispers from the 80s and 90s, but I never saw anything. I never had raw evidence, and quite frankly, I was probably a little bit too naive when I first came up.
With the overwhelming evidence that is in that report, why not make that step with this opening?
It's too much of a festive night to worry about that. I mean, because I don't know what evidence you're talking about. I mean, show it to me.
Accountable. If it's found that someone did improperly tamper with balls in some way, it's important for you, the legacy of this team, that someone's held accountable.
Well, that's for, I'm not the one that imposes, those type of, accountability. It's, discipline and all that. That's, not really my job, so.
What penalty should there be for someone who is taking these performance-enhancing drugs?
I think it's a self-inflicted penalty. They break down quick. It's a quick fix. They're in and out of the game. If he's putting that stuff in my body, if what he's saying, which is totally false, if he's doing that to me, I should have a third ear coming out my forehead.
Because ESPN surveyed a number of doctors and experts in this field, and they said that the primobolan could never be prescribed by a doctor.
Whatever. First of all, I want to see these tests because I haven't seen them. In fairness to me, I am saying I'm guilty of being naive and not having all the information and being negligent, but I would love to see the test before I start answering questions that I've never even heard this word. But
in your heart of hearts, will you ever be back?
I've been led to believe that America is a forgiving country, and if you do the right things, keep your nose clean, be a good citizen, pay your taxes, do all the things you're supposed to do, eventually you'll get a second chance.
This has raised a lot of uncomfortable conversations for people around this country who view you, three-time Super Bowl champion, a two-time MVP, as their idol. The question they're asking themselves is, what's up with our hero? So can you answer right now, is Tom Brady a cheater?
I don't believe so.
Some very important questions, but I think more relevant to an investigation regarding fraud or some sort of illicit wrongdoing is the responses to those questions that help us understand whether or not someone is involved in perpetrating a fraud. Right? Good afternoon. My name's Chris Norris, and I'm going to be spending the next hour with you guys talking about a topic that I know at times can be certainly a bit of frustration, a source of anxiety, loss of sleep, high stress, pit stains. Right? There's all kinds of different emotional and psychological phases an investigator would go through anytime they have to sit down in front of someone perpetrating a fraud and make an effort to elicit the truth and get from that subject what I like to say, getting those three magic words I love to hear. And I'm not talking about getting someone to say, I love you, right? The three words, of course, are, I did it. And most important, getting the truth from someone who is doing something they're not supposed to be doing. My career started 29 years ago. Wanted to go into law enforcement. Was at Arizona State University. Wanted to go into law enforcement. Found a job in the private sector. Was first introduced to Wicklander-Zulawski and Associates in 1989, and I've been using these theories throughout my career to get people to tell me the truth and solve cases. In fact, most of my career was built on white-collar crime, financial crimes, organized crime, solving cases without evidence, and going out and getting someone to tell me. We knew something happened. We didn't know exactly what. We don't know all the details. I have several people that could be involved. Sitting down, asking questions like that, determining someone's potential involvement, and eventually turning them into telling the truth. And what I'm going to spend time with you today talking about is just that. How do you get someone to tell you the truth when they've done something wrong? Particularly when there's a consequence to telling you the truth when they've done something wrong. And that's a difficulty in all of this. And the training that I do, as Peter said, I've been around the world. I have provided training in 6 continents. I've been in 6 continents in the last 5 months. My recent trips have taken me into Abuja, Kabul, into Australia, to Brazil with the Olympics and fraud, document fraud going on down there with visas and passports and that kind of thing. Been around the world talking to people about the art of interviewing, the art of interrogation, and getting someone to tell you something they don't want to tell you. And the difficulty in these conversations always lies in the fact that more often than not, what we are asking someone to do is to share a deep, dark secret with us. Perhaps something that nobody else knows. So why should they tell you? Why should they tell me? And what we do is we use some basic theories to get through resistance to encourage honesty from our subjects, and that's what I want to share with you. Our firm, Wicklander-Zulawski and Associates, based in Chicago. We're an investigative firm that also, more importantly, provides training. And our senior partners, Doug Wicklander and David Zulawski, are polygraph examiners by trade. So the theories that we teach and that I'm sharing with you today and that I encourage you to pass along to the future practitioners of the world is a non-confrontational approach to an accusatory interview. If you think about sitting down with someone, if I have to sit as an investigator by practice, if I have to sit with someone and essentially accuse them of being involved in some fraud, some sort of nefarious act, you know, that sort of thing, what that does is it elicits resistance. It generates resistance, a lack of cooperation, oftentimes a denial. In fact, what you see here on the board is a reflection of a very traditional approach to an accusatory interview. There are 9 steps to it. The first of the 9 steps, as you notice, is listed as a positive confrontation, which means it is confrontational in nature. The way this process works, a very simple approach to it, you see it in Hollywood, you see it, you know, on the cop shows and et cetera. It is me walking into a room with a file, having whatever evidence or information I may have, the data that we're able to extract and that you're able to give me, you know, through the world of audit and everything else, that I walk in and I look at someone and I point at them and I say, Peter, there's absolutely no doubt you're the one responsible for moving funds into, you know, account ABC. Now, if you think about that, if you look at someone and you make a you know, a claim like that, that is a direct positive confrontation, what kind of a reaction does that again, what do people do? What would they say when you say to someone, you did this? Yeah, you get it, right? And you get the denial. You get, I don't know what you're talking about. Which what that means is if we follow a traditional approach like this, not only do I have to get my person who's involved in a fraud, this fraudster, to admit to being involved in some sort of criminal act, if it is criminal in nature, but now I also have to get him to admit to being a liar. And I could reflect back on interviews early in my career, you know, and of course I've had many times when I've had someone look at me and say, are you calling me a liar? Right? And I've investigated things ranging from homicide to, you know, simple breach of policy in the workplace, that kind of thing. And if you think about it, are you calling me a liar? This person's worried about being called a liar rather than the criminal act I just accused them of. Why? Because now they don't have to talk about the fraud. Now they're talking about something else. They're now controlling the conversation. So what we do is we remove this. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a short little video clip with you to give you an idea of how people react when accused like this using a confrontational approach. This happens to be a homicide case. Listen to what happens when our subject here gets accused of homicide.
The investigation indicates that you're the one that killed Shirley.
You're kidding.
No.
All right? That is his initial visceral reaction to that. The investigation indicates you're the one that killed Shirley. Listen to what he says right after that, though.
No. There's no question about it. I wish I had, Toby, Toby, I want you to, Toby, I want you to, listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying, okay? Listen to what I'm saying. Thank you. Let me finish what I'm saying, okay? There's no question.
And what we're getting now is denial after denial, which now means we have to go through that barrier to get him to tell us the truth. Whatever rapport we may have built with him in the early stages has now been severed. That relationship is now damaged. And it becomes a difficult task for us. So what do? We're going to change the dynamic of that conversation. Let me introduce to you the theory of a non-confrontational approach to an accusatory interview and the way we practice fraud interviewing in the field. The way it works is this. I've got a little flow chart I'll use with you here, right? What we find is there are 4 phases to the interview process. The 4 phases are represented on the screen here. We start out where our subject is in a state of resistance. They are resisting the truth. They're resisting the process. They might be resisting me as an individual. But there's an element of resistance. So what do? We have to reduce that resistance so that they're willing to talk. Once we get past that barrier and we get through the resistance level, we can move to the second phase where we obtain the initial truth, the initial bit of information. We have it listed as obtaining the initial admission in a fraud case. From there, we can move into the third phase. Once we get the initial admission on the table, in the third phase, we develop information around that admission, not only getting our subject to corroborate what we know from the facts of the case, from the investigation, from the audit, from the data mining that we go through, but telling us things we don't know. That's what's important in a process like this, is finding out how it was able to happen. Why did it occur? What sort of protocol is missing that allowed this to occur? What else is happening? And I'll give you examples of that here shortly. Eventually we move through and they say, hey Chris, I told you everything. That's it, there's nothing else. And we can go to the fourth phase where we close it out. Administratively, we follow protocol, whatever regulatory issues we're bound by. We get statements from people, we get them right out. In fact, we get written statements from the people that we talk to. A handwritten confession from the person that we talk to. Now, how do we enter into that? I don't tell someone I need you to write a statement. I don't ask them for a written confession. You know what we do? We ask for a letter of apology. And what they do is they write a letter of apology. There's a case that I had a couple years ago, senior VP. Individual had confessed to nearly $1 million worth of embezzlement. At the end of the conversation, I said, I've got to go talk to the board. I'd like to fill them in on what you told me, how our conversation went, but I also want to give you an opportunity to have a voice in that office. Would you like to write a letter of apology? Which, of course, he gladly did. He signed 4 pages. Those 4 pages went to the IRS. Those 4 pages went to his criminal proceedings. That's how we close out conversations. So the question is, how do you take someone through these 4 phases? What are we going to do? How do we do this in a non-confrontational way? When it comes to reducing resistance, our research says to us what we need to do is 2 things to get through. What? What's the matter?
Is there a lawyer anywhere in the force?
No, he waived his rights. He waived his rights. He volunteered he volunteered to a non-custodial, waived his rights, and sat and had a conversation.
So do you have self-selection of stupid people?
He waived his rights. Yeah. I'm going to explain to you right now, and in fact, you're going to meet him in a minute here, right? Here's how this works, right? When it comes to reducing resistance, research tells us there's 2 things that we need to do. We need to first establish credibility. Establishing credibility is about taking hope away. It is about convincing someone, I know what you did, I caught you, you're busted, you're mine, I've got a mountain of evidence, that kind of thing. We never say those things, but that's what we're implying in the early stages here of building credibility. Think about this, when it comes to children, how many in here have kids? You're gonna realize, okay, I've got one that's here, right? My daughter's an adult now. I want you to think about this. Those of you with kids, your kids tell you the truth when they've done something wrong if they don't think you know about it? I've never been laying in bed and in the middle of the night have my daughter knock on my bedroom door. Dad, I'm cheating on exams at school. There's beer at the parties I'm going to. It doesn't happen. I have to convince her, Erica, I know you were at the mall today when you told me you were going to the library. And the reason I know you were at the mall, Mrs. Smith next door, she told me she liked your new haircut when she saw you at the mall today. Oh, right? And what have I done? I've said, I know where you were. I caught you, you're busted, right? So it's about credibility, right? So the first part of this is credibility. What happens too often, and what you saw with a very traditional approach of I know what you did, is what we're doing is we throw credibility in their face and force them to defend that credibility. What we're going to do here is balance I know what you did with showing understanding and saying, it's not that big a deal. It's okay that you went to the mall, I get it. You guys finished your project early? Went to get a smoothie? I get that. Your friends talk to you going, sorry? There's always something worse. There's always something worse. Yeah. There's always something worse. Yeah, and I'll explain the process to you, right? But what we do is we show a sense of understanding, right? We never say it's okay to kill someone. We never say it's okay to perpetrate, fraud, that kind of thing. But the whole idea is what we do is by showing understanding. You see here, if this will flip over, is we rationalize with people. Part of your fraud triangle includes the rationalization. They've rationalized why they're involved in fraud. We're going to help rationalize for them. And the rationalization is all about providing a psychologically acceptable reason to why people do the things that they do. You never tell someone what they've done is legally acceptable. But taking a step back here, when it comes to credibility, the way we accomplish credibility is two ways. First, with a professional introduction. The professional introduction is the handshake. It's looking someone in the eyes. It's using their name. It's treating them with respect. And if you think about it like this, had you done something foolish, would you want someone yelling at you? Would you want someone in your face? And the answer to that question is no. So we treat people with respect. It gets credibility in you as a person, as an investigator, as an auditor, right away, immediately. It starts a process of developing rapport. How do we get credibility in our investigation? We use what we call an introductory statement. There are three basic elements to our introductory statement. We tell our subject who we are and what it is we do, the types of things, plural, that we look into, and the tools that we use to help us do our job. It's very simple. Here's who I am, what it is I do. These are the things I look into. Here's the tools that help me figure out exactly what happened. It is a 5-minute monologue that says, I'm good at what I do, I know what you're doing, and I could prove every bit of it. We never say those words, but that is a message that is presented to them. And in 5 minutes, I am able to convince someone I know everything they've done. That's what theory is built around here, that credibility right away. From there, we make a transition that takes us to show understanding that says, the thing is, as much as I know what happened, I don't know why it happened, and that allows me to begin to rationalize with the individual. Again, providing a psychologically acceptable reason to behavior. So when we think about the fraud triangle and how people rationalize in their own mind already why it's acceptable to be involved in fraud and to steal and embezzle and do the things that they do, we're helping them with that. And essentially what we do is we tell stories. It's a narrative format telling stories of good people making bad decisions. It's done in almost like as a parable. Good people do dumb things all the time. Let me give you an example, and we share a story. In fact, one of the ways that I tend to do it myself, it fits my personality, it fits my style, I tell personal stories of the stupid things I've done in my life. Now, I do not sit in front of someone and say, hey, look, when I was a kid, I was the biggest burglar on the block, but hey, look at me now, things worked out great, woohoo, right? I do not talk about the crimes I've committed. Right? What I do is I talk about tough decisions in my life, how peer pressure has impacted me, how financial pressures have backed me into a corner where I've felt desperate. And I understand how people out of desperation do dumb things. And a homicide, how we react out of emotion. There's a lot of different things that we can do to ease someone through the process of getting them through resistance so they're willing to talk. And what happens is we rationalize in the third person. If you think about the early stages of our conversation here, that introductory statement is, here's who I am and what it is I do. These are the things I look into. These are the tools I use. It's not even about my suspect at this point. And by the way, here are the reasons why other people do the stupid things they do. It's never about the subject. So you see, we rationalize in the third person. That maintains non-confrontational. They listen, they're not compelled to defend. Once I get someone through the process, and what we do through this is we're evaluating behaviors, they're listening to us. We're going to talk about behavior analysis in a second. The goal is to get my subject through resistance to the point where they're in a state of submission. And my subject will enter into submission in one of two ways, either a rational decision or an emotional decision. But when I see that, it is now time to personalize the conversation. And I take the conversation, which up to this point has been a bit ambiguous and third person, that kind of thing. And I finally focus on them and I bring the word in that I haven't brought up yet. And you see it on the screen there. The word is you. The thing is, we don't know what issues you have going on in your life that may have caused you to make some decisions you've made. And the way I teach this step is I want you to think about the first time you swim every year. We don't just run and jump in the water, right? What do we do the first time? Right? Put your toes in, put your foot in, feel the water. Now me, I grab the kids, I throw the kids in the pool, I have them tell me how cold it is. But when you put your foot in the water, what happens is if the water's cold, they're going to tell me they're not ready to be honest. So at this point, I haven't even asked a question. In other words, if I say we don't know what issues you're facing, what are you talking about? They said they're not ready to be honest. If I say we're at a crossroad, you have to decide. Do you want to take the high road or are you going to take the low road? Because you have input into our investigation. They give me the, yeah, okay. They're saying the water's warm. It allows me to now move forward and ask my question. Now, question formulation is very important when it comes to interviewing, when it comes to accusatory interview and an interrogation. You have to understand when to ask open-ended, confirming, expansion, echo, closed-ended, enticement, assumptive sorts of questions. What's important about the questions that you ask in the context of a fraud interview, it's not just the type of question that we're asking. We do have to understand the flow of an interview and how we process those sorts of questions to elicit information from people. But what's also important is the timing of the question. The timing of the question becomes very, very important to us. The timing here is my subject is through resistance. The time is right to ask the question. And what we do is we ask an assumptive question. There's an element of assuming responsibility, assuming guilt within the way we formulate the question. And for us in the context of a fraud type of interview, and I do a lot of embezzlement cases, is I don't ask the question, did you take the money? The question is often, when's the very first time you took money from the company? Simple question. When's the first time? And if you think about a question like that, the subject that I'm asking the question of, they have three possible responses when I say, when's the very first time you ever took money from the company? They could say I didn't. One of the options, they have an option to say no. Whether it's a truth or a lie, they can say to me, I didn't do it. They could admit it was a week ago. And again, whether it's truth or a lie, they have an option to offer up some form of an admission. The third option that we get when asked at the right time, behaviorally, and when someone's in a state of submission, is often a thought process, a pause, a hesitation, that kind of thing. When's the very first time you took money from the company? I see a behavior reaction like this. What you do, you see it on the screen, you ask a follow-up question. The follow-up question we ask is always an exaggeration to the original question. In other words, in the context of that type of interview, in a fraud interview like that, when's the first time you took money? I mean, it wasn't your first day on the job, was it? First day, my God, no way. And what did I just get out of that? I got an acknowledgement that they took money, but just not on the first day. Right? So it becomes, the way we've defined it, it becomes my initial admission. What it does is it gets information on the table. Now they're more willing to talk. The use of the follow-up question is, the psychology behind it is, this is bad, making this okay. The guy that I mentioned, senior VP, that kind of thing. The question I asked, he was a 33-year employee with the company. 33-year employee with the company. I asked the question, when's the very first time you took money from the company? He said, I said, we're not going back 20 years, are we? You didn't do it 20 years ago, did you? And he goes, no, God, no. I haven't been doing it that long. I re-asked the question and said, Well, first off, we support it. That's great. I know you haven't been doing it that long. Re-asked the question, so when was the first time? How long you been doing it, John? And he said, first time was about 1.5 years ago. Great, tell me what happened 1.5 years ago, John. And he started to develop information around the initial admission, initial confession. I continued to develop information. Now, the thing about that particular case is, I walked into that office. There was it started off as a travel expense voucher fraud. Quarterly tax reconciliation, accountant stumbles onto something unusual, takes it to the controller. Controller agrees, this is odd. Let's audit his expense vouchers for the last 1.5 years. They audit his vouchers. They came to me and said, our audit reflects in the last 1.5 years, almost $40,000 in questionable expenses. They said there could be a reasonable explanation of what we're seeing. We're concerned there's fraud. Chris, can you come have a conversation with our senior VP? Absolutely. I sat down. In a very short period of time, I was convinced there was fraud. Based on his responses to earlier interview to the questions, I then decided to take him through non-confrontational. He ends up admitting. Within 45 minutes of that conversation, again, his confession was approaching the $1 million mark. I walked in with 40 grand, and I walked away with nearly $1 million. And not just expense fraud, but I walked away with kickbacks, bribes in the field, other elements of fraud. So what we're focusing on in the development is not just getting him to acknowledge what we know. That is important, for sure. But find out what you don't know. In other words, get full disclosure. Get the truth from him about what he's involved in. Eventually, like I said, he said to me, Chris, that's it, there's nothing else. We move to the 4th phase. He writes a letter of explanation, a letter of apology that we're able to use moving forward. Whatever criminal proceedings we may or may not go through as an internal document, it's brilliant. That kind of thing. One thing you notice on that board, not one of those boxes says, here's where you reveal your evidence and where you lay your investigation on the table. It's because we don't do it. By practice. That doesn't mean we never do it, but it means by theory we don't. And the reason for that, we hold whatever information we have here so we can tell if they're telling us the truth. Again, a way to approach fraud investigations, I've seen it done, is also sitting down and saying, Ed, do you want to explain this $40,000 worth of travel vouchers that we have here from last 1.5 years? Typically how people do it. And Ed might come up with an excuse. Oh, I'm sorry about that one. I meant to do this. Oh, I changed that. And he may walk away not admitting to anything. Now, maybe he will say, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did that $40,000, but that's it. There's nothing else. Instead, I play the game here, and I get Ed to tell me everything without revealing, here's what we need to talk about. I'm transparent at the beginning, but I don't show him what we have. Think of it this way. I always talk about the poker game. When it comes to a 7-card poker game, let's say, 4 cards up, 3 down, pile of money in the middle of the table, we're all playing. Right? What's the last card I would want to reveal in my hand? It's my trump, my ace, my winner, my best card. Because if I throw my card early, you say, I'm done, I'm out, I fold, you're good. And if I walk into Ed and say, explain that. I'm good, you got me on that. I'm sorry, I quit. I'm not talking, I'm getting my lawyer. Right? That's how the process works. Now, one of the things that you notice out of this, you saw in the traditional model, step 3, step 4 were resistance. It is denials. Notice that also doesn't have denials in it. Now, what we teach is basic rules and fundamental approach to handling resistance, and that elevated resistance, verbalized resistance. There's 2 ways people deny. An emphatic denial, I didn't do it, and an explanatory denial, I wouldn't because. I had it on a credit card fraud case recently. I had a woman sit in front of me and tell me, I wouldn't do that. I work hard for my degree. What does her working hard for her degree have to do with taking a credit card to the shopping mall and running up $8,000 in fraud charges on a credit card? Nothing. But in her mind, they link. So we have to understand the meaning behind the way people deny, how to counter it, how to overcome that type of resistance. What I found with her, what we find with those explanatory denials, I wouldn't because they often reveal a fear. And her fear that she was revealing to me, the thing that was resisting and holding her back from the truth was, when she said, I work hard for my degree, she's reflecting to me, if I tell you I took that credit card to the mall, I will never get a job in the finance industry again. Therefore, I'm not telling you. So her fear was about future employment. It wasn't about the moment. It was about, I'll never get a job again. And if I address that with her, I can overcome that obstacle. That's theory right there. You are gonna see a video of me sitting down with an accountant applying that theory. So let's talk about some other principles we want to follow when it comes to this type of approach here, right? Come on. And the way it works is, I'm sorry. I'm gonna share a quick video. I lived in London for, I don't know, almost 2 years, opening our European office. Here's a friend of mine that's shared a video with me about him using this approach in his personal life.
Nathan, let me tell you who I am. I'm your dad, and it is my job to protect our family. Now this includes the house, the car, the food, the toys, DVDs, and everything else that's in the house, including all my children. There are many different ways that losses occur. This could be a broken window, food being put in the DVD player, or chocolate going missing, broken toys, or a scratched DVD. Now when I believe something has happened, I conduct an investigation. Now this could be a variety of different methods, including looking in the cupboards to see what we have, looking in the bin to see what wrappers have been put away, and even watching to see what's going on. Now Nathan, as I said, I have conducted my investigation and it is now complete. And I want to ask you, when was the first time you took chocolate? It wasn't on the first day you were born, was it? No, of course not. But Nathan, when was the last time you took chocolate?
Yeah. Caught red-handed, right? Those are the best cases. But the idea, the principle of this is how do you get someone through resistance so that they're willing to open up and talk to you? We even teach negotiation tactics. And the principle is how to negotiate like an interrogator and use those sorts of techniques, those theories in a negotiation to get someone to move further from their initial point. So let's talk about how we accomplish some of the things and things that we have to consider. First off, why do you think people confess? What do you think is the number one reason to why people confess to the crimes that they commit? Getting off their chest is high on the list. It is not number one. To kind of mitigate their a little bit. It's not number one. Say it again. No. Sorry? Maybe. Sort of. Well, it's built into that. It feels good. You know what? For people, there is a sense of relief out of it. There's no doubt. The number one reason, I haven't heard it yet, but when we talk about why people confess, the number one reason, and you see it on the board here, is because they think the truth is known. Right? I'm going to share a story with you. It's an awful story, but I'm going to share it with you. A personal story. I came back. I lived in London for a while. I came back just before Christmas. I'm catching up with family, friends, etc. I'm out with a friend. We're having a beer. Catching up, that kind of thing. And he looked at me and he said, "Hey, man, I got bad news." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I found out my wife was running around on me." I said, "Ooh." He said, "Yeah." I said, "You okay?" And he said, "Yeah." We started to talk about it. Of course, me being me, I said, "Did you confront her?" He said, "Of course." I said, "What'd she say?" He said, "She lied." "Oh, we're just friends. You're wrong." Now, what he had was email exchange between his wife and this other person. He ended up looking at her and saying, "You want to deny that?" And of course she said, "I'm sorry," and apologized and begged forgiveness. The idea is, why do people confess? Because the truth is known. So what are we accomplishing through an introductory statement of here's who I am, what I do, the things I look at, and why I look into them, or how I look into them? We're accomplishing, I know what you did. But doing it in a way that doesn't force someone to defend that, right? So understanding why people confess is very important to us in developing our strategy and how we sit down with someone. The next thing to look at is why do people lie? People lie for a number of reasons. But understanding these basic principles of human nature, what that does is it helps our strategy and how we determine when and how to sit with someone and how to talk to someone. So what do? One of the things that we're going to consider in all of this is just that, the room arrangements. And you're going to see when I show you a video here in a second, and what might appear to you as being an odd room arrangement, but it is done tactically. It is done with purpose. What we're trying to do, as you see on the screen here, is establish privacy in the conversation for two reasons, psychologically and legally. The psychological aspects of privacy is, think of it like this. I mentioned earlier, we're asking for a secret. It's much easier to get someone to share a secret when they're sitting one-on-one rather than sitting in a group. You have auditors that go out and they sit and they do meetings. They're not interviews when you sit at a conference table and you got 8 people there. And that person who's in accounts payable, who's been instructed by their boss to manipulate funds, is not going to be honest about what they're doing with their boss sitting in that office with you. So what do? We establish one-on-one privacy. The legal side of it is issues of defamation of character, false imprisonment. One of the things that I learned in doing training in Europe and in the UK, many of the grievances in a workplace disciplinary type of hearings were the aspects of false imprisonment. They wouldn't let me go. They forced me to answer questions. And all we had to do is simply address the way the room was set up. Because what they were doing was putting themselves between the subject and the door. And the subject now felt like they couldn't leave. I was forced to answer questions. So not only do I allow someone the rights to, you can leave at any time, you can get an attorney, you can do this and that and get, they'll waive their rights. But psychologically, what I'm going to do is put you closest to the door so you don't have an argument if I held you. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put your back to the door. Why? Because when you stare at the door, you know that's your escape route. When your back is to the door, you forget about how you get out of that office. And it's simple dynamics like that that encourage cooperation, that help someone get through those barriers. We're removing distractions, reminders of punishment. I had a case here in the DC area last summer. Still living in England at the time. I came into DC for some meetings with some federal law enforcement agencies here that I do work with. Get a call, Chris, can you go do an interview? We have a theft case at a distribution center in Virginia, blah, 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 absolutely. Now, regulatory issues say I need someone who's licensed and in the state of Virginia to sit down with this individual. So we contract with the PI locally. Guy comes out, former Metro DC guy, former copper. Comes out, I brief him on the case, tell him what his role is going to be for the day, which is unfortunately sit in a corner and listen to me talk. But what he's wearing a tie, he's wearing a suit. His tie clip was a pair of handcuffs. And so part of removing the punishment, I said, dude, you gotta get rid of the tie clip. No one wants to talk when they're staring at that. Right? Simple little things that we consider, right? So other things that we go through is proxemics. Proxemics is important. Dr. Ed Hall came up with 4 zones of proxemics we operate within psychologically. Intimate, private, social, public. What we're going to do is have a private conversation. When you're sitting at a desk and you're talking over a conference room table, you're talking over a desk, we are having a social conversation. So what you'll see is we're not at a desk. We actually sit within the 4-foot spacing, which is part of being private and personal. We sit here and have a conversation at this distance. It's all about proxemics, all about the psychology of encouraging honesty. All right? So in addition to room setup, we look at this here, and we have on the screen as an example of how we would set the room, where you have your S as your subject, I as the interviewer, W would be the witness to that conversation. And I want to give you a quick example. This is my senior VP.
For us, though, is trying to...
When you look at it, notice how we are in the executive boardroom, but I'm not sitting at the board table. I'm sitting off to the side. Notice we're also not sitting in those nice big high back leather chairs that have wheels that rock, recline. Why? Because I want him sitting still. That way any movement he does give me is relevant to his behavior in him being truthful, me evaluating the truthfulness of the statements that he makes. The door is behind him. It's hard to tell, but the door is above his head. I've taken a large boardroom and I've shrunk it. I made it a nice private conversation. That's how we conduct interviews on fraud. We don't sit at the table like you see in Hollywood. We don't sit at a desk. We will eventually move to the table when we have to review documents after he tells me the truth. In fact, there was an investigation I had many years ago connected to organized crime, and that single investigation, I turned over to the state's attorney's office and to the FBI over 22,000 documents as evidence in that investigation. Not one of them was in the room with me when I talked to the main subject. Right? Room setup becomes important. Let me show you the very end of this short little video clip. Listen, watch what happens and listen to what he says to me.
Well, that's as I said earlier, that was very, very minimal. So minimal, 5 times. No, I really don't remember ever doing that 5 times. No.
7?
Yeah. It's my wife. She works here. Yeah, that's right.
Did you hear what he said? That's my wife. She works here. And if you recognize where we were in the context of the interview, I asked the question, how many times that happened? I don't know, minimal. I said, minimal, like 5 times? Nah, I don't even know if it's that many. We're in the early stages of his confession, and his wife walked into the office. That could have been a disaster, right? But we still set the room with purpose. Why? Part of it is about behavior analysis. It's not just the psychological and legal factors that we talked about. Part of it is the behavior analysis side of this. When it comes to behavior analysis, we have to understand the basics of communication. And research tells us that nonverbal communication accounts for greater than 50%, right? Words are less than 10%. Words are important. We can control the words that come out of our mouth. People don't always understand what their body language is doing. And if someone's sitting at a desk, I can't read their body language. I see them from here up, or they lean on the desk. That's why John is away from the desk, so I can evaluate him from head to toe. So his movements become significant to me. And as we evaluate behavior, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, the tone, when we talk about verbal communication, we're focusing on tone. What's important to understand about verbal communication is the basics of it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And as much as we teach people and we train in our courses that we train about behavior analysis and recognizing truth or deception, trying to increase our ability to understand when someone's being honest with us and when they're not, that kind of thing. Part of the process in all of this is understanding how we communicate with people. We evaluate them, but they are evaluating me as the interviewer. And they're trying to determine, am I going to be honest with this person who's talking to me right now? So we also talk about our delivery in all of this message here.
So does it happen where you're interrogating someone and they actually try to find out what information you know? So
Sure.
if I was on the team again, do I just tell you, I'm not going to tell you anything until you tell me?
Yeah. And so, is it Nemeth? Am I saying it right? Yeah. So if Nemeth, if you say that to me, hey, look, I'm not talking to you, show me what you got. My response is, Nemeth, that's not for this conversation. Today's conversation is to find out how honest you're going to be, how cooperative you're going to be. I could show you everything, but it doesn't help you. You know why it won't help you? When I walk out of this room, they're going to ask me one question. You know what the question is going to be? Was he honest? And the only way I could tell if you're honest with me is if you tell me what my investigation revealed without having to show you. If we have to review things, we're going to do that in a different setting. That's not what today's conversation is about. Yeah. That's how we do it. Right? Yeah.
Okay. So, success, failure.
Yeah.
How long did you take to learn to do this?
I learned it in '89. I'm a competitive person. My father was a high school football coach. I'm a competitive person, and I practiced and I practiced and I practiced, and I became what I thought was efficient in it, and it helped me do low-level cases. I can't answer the question. I know how much time and effort I put into it, but it took a few months. It is as anything, as we talk about in our training classes, and as you guys know as teachers, instructors, et cetera, my father was a lifelong teacher. 38 years my father was a teacher. Taught me many things. One of the most important things he taught me was never be the smartest person in the room, because then you stop learning, right? And I texted him early this morning and said, Dad, it's easy today. I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room. Right? But the idea here is, excuse me, it's a perishable skill, right? The art of interviewing, and it is an art. There's science behind it, but it is an art. It's a perishable skill to evaluate behavior, to be able to talk to someone and talk to someone with confidence about something that's quite difficult, to do. So how long did it take? It's hard. But it is one of those things that I know that I have people that leave a class, leave a training seminar. Our seminars tend to be 2 days, right? So I'm giving you 2 days in 1 hour, right? And I get emails within a week from people that say, Chris, I got a result. Chris, I walked in on a case that was, a $1,200 fraud case, and I walked out with a $5,000 confession. But you have to practice it. They're perishable, right? So understanding communication becomes important. We talk about how we communicate. A couple things to think about here. When it comes to behavior analysis, problems of observation, we want to focus on the individual, overcoming any biases that we have, making sure we're looking at. There's certainly inherent flaws to investigative interviews, and one of those inherent flaws is being buried in your notepad. And if we understand the context of behavior and nonverbal behavior being very valuable to us, if we're buried in a notepad taking notes about what's being said, then I'm not engaged with the individual at all. So we have to balance certain things like this and the problems of observation. The most important one is the bottom bullet point. Do you have a clear behavior norm? And what that equates to, and I'll go into more detail in just a second, but what it equates to is understanding what the truth looks like before you can make assessments of deception. And that's what the behavior norm part is about. Other things we need to consider are barriers to listening, focusing on the words that are being said, how the words are presented to us. Hearing about Watson this morning and, or this afternoon, and the process of data mining words and understanding, and analyzing, what the words mean becomes important to us. So focusing on the words. But when it comes to behavior norm, what we do is we ask our subject at the beginning of every conversation biographical types of questions. We have a chit chat. What's your name, address, social, your date of birth? How long you been working here? What did you used to do? Where did you used to live? Tell me a little bit about yourself. You have a chit chat. Why? I want to see what they look like when they're telling me the truth. What is their nonverbal behavior? What is their verbal behavior patterns? What is their posture, their eye contact, facial expressions? As I move into the context of the interview, what I'm going to look for, what I'm going to listen for, are deviations from that norm. What's important isn't just a simple deviation, but it's the timing of those deviations become important to us. When the behavior is on time, in other words, when it matches the stimulus that I've provided to them, then it becomes quite relevant to us. If it's not on time, then there's times that a cough is a cough and a scratch is a scratch, and it means nothing to me. But we have to start off by understanding the truth to help us be a bit more accurate in recognizing deception. Why? Because we're all different. We all communicate in different ways, verbally and non-verbally.
Is it the case that sometimes you get a confession, sometimes you don't get a confession, but you use these behavioral cues to make an expert determination that the person is guilty or lying, and sometimes the person is just innocent? And if those are the kind of cases, what's the breakdown between them?
So we have... there's a couple answers here for you. The first one is people don't hire us when they have evidence. They don't pay for our services and what we charge to do what we do when they have evidence, right? They call the police when they have evidence, or they call someone else. It's not us. So most of the cases that we work is either circumstantial or no evidence cases. It's quite rare when we go in where we have actual evidence on someone. Having said that, using the process that we go through, we have over an 85% confession rate. We always substantiate the confession by when John tells me all the bribes and kickbacks and other things that he's doing, he's giving me the details that we can then go verify that. We can then do a forensic audit following the confession that we get from an accountant and verify the accounts that he says that he moved funds into and that sort of thing, right? So we'll verify information. We do not walk away with opinions and say, I didn't get him to talk, but my professional opinion was he wasn't honest with me, he's lying to me, he's a guilty person. We don't offer opinions, we stay in fact. Now, I might, through a report, say that what he said, the fact of what he said reflects, But we don't go through and say, we don't offer opinions. We always stay with facts. And so what we do is we follow basic rules. Some of the questions that you saw with the video with Tom Brady and other stuff, right? Those are behavior-based questions where truthful people talk and act one way, guilty people talk and act another way. You think of Roger Clemens, you guys laughed at Roger Clemens talking about I'd have a 30 coming out my forehead, right? That's not what an innocent person says when you ask what should happen to someone who's cheating the game, especially to someone with Roger Clemens' stats and his, who he may be perceived as being in the game. You would expect punishment from him. So we follow some rules, but we don't offer opinions in terms of, I think he lied, therefore. We either get the truth or not. I saw a hand over here, yeah.
What's the rate of false confessions?
What's what?
Rate of false confessions.
0. We don't have any false confessions, yeah. And I know Innocence Project, and we actually work with a few different research projects. We're quite involved in the world of academia and in what it is we do in psychology and that kind of thing. And with the Innocence Project many years ago, they started focusing on false confession. That changed to coercive tactics. But we don't have any on record, any false confessions using this type of approach. The reason, part of the reason anyway, that the Innocence Project kind of moved from false confession to coercive is they didn't find enough false confessions. So they focused on the tactics that are used rather than the actual confessions, but we don't have any.
How long does it typically take to get a confession, and are there particular characteristics of people that make it very difficult to get confessions?
Yes, I've had conversations that were several hours. For us, the average, when we look at, I guess, a bell curve of when we were typically going to get our confessions or someone to open up and be honest with us, that bell curve is 15 to 45 minutes. For us in the office, when we get our first admission, that first, getting the, no, I didn't do it, my first week on the job, no, I didn't do it 20 years ago, I haven't been doing it that long, that typically comes at the 16 to 18 minute mark for us. But when we look at a bell curve, yeah, and yes, I've had some that have been much longer. Someone, who it took a while to get them to admit. But we even think of that. If I'm in there for too long, why create risk for me? See, if I'm in an office with someone for too long and I can't get them to talk, especially if I don't have evidence. It's one thing if I have evidence. But if I'm in an office for too long, what happens is I end up creating career opportunities for people below me, if you know what I mean, right? So we're not going to damage that as well, but it's 15 to 45 is most common. Quite low, because it's positioned as just a conversation. I don't know if I can quantify it. I can say I've had a couple people lawyer up with me, only a few, and I've had hundreds and hundreds of investigations, which is going to translate to thousands of interviews. I've only had a few lawyer up on me. I've never had anyone walk away or flat out refuse to talk. Now, what I found when I was spending time in Europe and doing training in the UK and through Europe, it was much more common there, the no comment type of interviews, no comment, no comment, no comment. But we're changing the dynamic of the conversation and encouraging. So the way that we present it, it's very, very rare when someone doesn't talk. In fact, I don't know if any of you in here know or are familiar with Colonel Russell Williams up in Canada. He's in prison right now. He used to run the largest military base in Ontario, in Canada, and it was in Ontario. He's in prison on rape and murder charges. His conversation was nearly 10 hours total, but that's everything. Getting all of his confession to the murders and everything else, right? They used non-confrontational, and throughout the entire process, what they did was they continued to offer in Canada the Charter of Rights and say, you don't have to talk to me, you can get an attorney, that kind of thing. And he continued to waive his rights and confess to murder using a non-confrontational approach. So even in something serious like that, even as someone as smart as that, highly decorated colonel with the Canadian Air Force, he stayed in the conversation because that's what we're trying to present to them is just a chat, essentially, right?
How much do you know about how your subjects felt about the process after it was over?
We ask that question every time. In fact, there are 4 or 5, there's 4 always, there might be a 5th depending on the circumstances of the case, that post-interview, whether we get an admission or confession or not, our goal is the truth. It's not necessarily a confession, but there's 4 post-interview questions that we always ask, and one of them happens to be, could I have done anything to make this process any easier for you today? How do you feel you were treated today? that kind of thing. We ask it every person that we get.
Majority of people feel relieved.
Yes.
That they feel like they were treated fairly, justly.
Yeah.
They're glad they got it off their chest.
Correct. That is quite common.
And next question.
Yeah.
Do you modify this process when you use it on your kids?
The kids, no, go for it with the kids. Dive in with the kids. The spouse is a different story. Do not ever, right? Do not ever use this on your significant other at home, because you may get answers to questions you don't want answers to. I live by a basic rule. You don't want to know, don't ask. And it's a very simple, fundamental rule. You don't want to know, don't ask the question. And, that kind of thing. But there's, go.
On the false confession idea, your answer that it's zero, is that because nobody ever even starts to do a false confession? Or because you can always tell?
I think it's both. It's because we always verify information that they're telling us to confirm that what they're telling us is accurate. So that's part of it. So part of our process is substantiating everything that they've said, right? The other thing is if I'm in a conversation and you're beginning to tell me something that I'm concerned with, and Jeb, I think that maybe you're telling me something that's not accurate, and for whatever reason you might be providing a false confession. One of the ways that we combat that, try to challenge that, is I make up an incident. I make up an account that does not exist, and I ask you about that account. And when you tell me, no, I'm not involved in that, then that's helping confirm that you're being more honest with this. Now, if you were to say to me, yeah, I did that too. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'll pay it back. I got a problem, because now I know you're telling me something that isn't true because I just made it up. So we do certain things in the context of the interview to kind of mitigate the risk of any sort of false confession that might come out. So that helps us as well.
Someone who knows nothing about this type of thing at all,
Yeah.
can you appreciate the generalizability of techniques like this? For example, in the spectrum of, something like budget and expense report, I can kind of see how establishing trust, maybe someone that would be pretty easy.
Yeah.
I'm a terrorist.
Yeah. Okay.
Help you appreciate in the spectrum of severity where this fits or whether it doesn't?
Absolutely, yeah. Part of my training, as I mentioned, has taken me to Abuja and Kabul, and it's not because someone's fudging expense reports. Part of my travels and training has taken me to places like Abuja and Kabul, right? And it's not because someone's fudging expense reports, right? So we do counterterrorism, we do all kinds of training. You name a federal law enforcement agency, we provide training to them. Now, we will modify geographically where we're at based on, cultural backgrounds and certain things like this, but we take the foundation, we take the psychology of this non-confrontational approach and build it into even an environment like that. And if you think about this, oftentimes I get resistance, particularly if we stay in the States and what we know, street crimes, gang-related crimes, violent crime, thing like that. And there's often pushback that's similar of how does it work in an environment like that? How does it work with an act of terrorism, that kind of thing? There's a fundamental, a universal, piece to this, which is everybody wants to be treated with respect. When I walk into an office with you and say, I know what you're doing, or you use what they consider to be advanced, interrogation techniques and the waterboarding and everything that went on and the whistleblower that came forward with information to that, right? They found that they're not getting information out of it, right? But how do they get information? They sit down and have a meal. They treat someone with respect. So again, my travels have taken me, because we'll take this theory. It's still about credibility. It's universal. And it's still about allowing someone to save face in the process that gets them to say, yeah, here's what I did. Now, the behavior piece of it is all based on physiology. And again, that's universal as well. But it's all fear-based, it's all fear-driven. Not fear in terms of threats, but fear in terms of credibility. Interrogation tactics tend to be based on one of two things. It's either fear-based. If you're honest with me, I'll talk to the DA, they'll go lighter on you. So it's fear-based. Or it's motive-based. Right, we blend the two, the way we present our rationalizations so that we can address both, but we don't make threats. We don't even talk about consequences ever in a conversation, that kind of thing. So it becomes relatable and transferable even to a high, very severe sort of crime like that. Just simply because it falls back to the psychology of human nature. The idea is this: we communicate in 3 ways. Psychology suggests we do anyway, as a parent, as an adult, and as a child. When you come in and say, I know you did this, you're a parent, you get childlike behavior. But when you treat someone with respect and you become an adult, we become collaborative. Think of your students. It's all about collaboration, right? This is a collaborative conversation. It's not me jamming you up and saying, I know what you did. It becomes collaborative, and that's why they can get people to talk even in those cases. And I know we're going over our time. right?
Yeah. You said something that you have 15% non-confession?
Yeah. And that would just be someone who's not cooperating. They don't want to talk. Again, it doesn't go back to someone walking out as much as no matter what we've tried, they're not willing to say the truth. And again, I might walk away and say I couldn't get them to talk. The evidence suggests, and then we can present our evidence to handle it either administratively, criminally, whatever we do. If there's no evidence, then we walk away and scratch our head. And I've scratched my head in a lot of conversations and walked away and thought, I'm convinced this is the guy. I can't get him to talk, but I'll never reflect that in a report and say, I know that he's the one that did it, unless I got you to say it. That's what happens. Yeah.
You said number one reason why people confess is because they think you already know.
Yeah.
So, do you think the success getting a confession depends on when you're brought in? Because presumably before you come in to interview the person, they've had conversations with people within the company or something like that.
We certainly.
So they must have been confronted by someone to some degree.
Yep. Compromise investigations are difficult for me. There's no doubt about that. If people start talking, and now they're compromised because now you've come in with an alibi, with a story, you're prepared to not be honest with me, that kind of thing. So it becomes a bigger challenge, which means, going back to the flow chart, your level of resistance is much higher, which means it might take me longer to get you through the resistance stage. So compromise investigations are difficult. There was a bank investigation that I had where the bank teller was told in an audit, your till is off 13 grand, go do a self-audit and see if you can find out what happened. So the bank essentially told her, we don't know where your money went. Now I've got to go interview her for fraud, for an embezzlement out of this bank. And I have no credibility because the bank told her, we don't know what you did. I have to convince her that I know something the bank doesn't know. So the resistance level might be higher because she's even had a night to sleep on it. We still do the same process. Yes. Yeah. Sorry? What happened to her? By the process of using an introductory statement, these are the things we do, rationalizing with her, encouraging her to be honest, that the bank hasn't made a decision on how to handle this yet, but your honesty may be able to influence them, and a couple little things like that. And it took a while, but eventually she started to talk.
Perhaps one more question. Russell wants to get his beer.
Sorry. What do I have here? One last quick thing, and so just so I can get through the slides here for you guys, and then we'll get you out of here. I know dinner's waiting on us and stuff. These are the rules that we follow. Rules to behavior analysis become important. We don't just go and use our intuition or our gut. We follow rules so that we're consistent in how we evaluate people. Okay. And then our focal point is always, let me get you to this slide real quick. It's always in the center of the face. For me, it's a bridge of the nose when I talk to people. Where does more information come from? The eyes. Focus here, narrow peripheral, I see the face. Broad peripheral, I read the body. And then I have influencing factors within the surrounding area. And so that's what that's about, is understanding where you gather information from people. And again, I could talk for hours. I'm going to be here all day tomorrow, and I know you guys have a lot of questions. I had a lot of people prior to the presentation say, I'm really interested. This is about really not only letting you guys know that there's ways that we do this in the field that are different than Hollywood, right? But it's also about being able to pass this information on to future practitioners and let them know that there's a soft, kind, gentle approach to have a conversation about difficult things. There's no doubt about that.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
Yeah? Okay. Thank you.